Welcome to Compiler's Interview Crashcasts, the podcast that helps you ace your technical interviews. I'm your host, Sheila, and today we're diving into a common question about compilers. Joining us is Victor, a senior backend engineer with extensive experience in compiler design. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sheila. I'm excited to share my knowledge with your listeners.
Great to have you here, Victor. Let's jump right in with our question for today. What is the difference between a compiler and an interpreter?
That's a great question, Sheila. At a high level, both compilers and interpreters are tools used to translate and execute programming languages. The main difference lies in how they process and run the code.
Could you elaborate on that, Victor? How does each tool approach code execution?
Certainly. A compiler takes the entire source code and translates it into machine code, or an intermediate representation all at once. This results in an executable file that can be run later. An interpreter, on the other hand, reads the source code line by line, translating and executing each instruction immediately.
I see. So, a compiler does all the translation work up front, while an interpreter works on the fly. Are there any advantages to using one over the other?
Absolutely. Compiled programs generally run faster because the translation is done ahead of time. However, interpreters offer more flexibility and can be easier to debug since they execute code line by line. Compiled programs are also platform-specific, while interpreted languages can often run on any platform with the appropriate interpreter installed.
That's interesting. Could you give us some examples of languages that typically use compilers versus interpreters?
Sure, languages like C and C++ are typically compiled, while Python and Ruby are usually interpreted. However, it's worth noting that the lines can blur. For example, Java uses a hybrid approach where code is compiled to bytecode, which is then interpreted by the Java virtual machine.
That's a great point about hybrid approaches. Could you delve a bit deeper into how these work?
Certainly, hybrid approaches like the one used by Java aim to combine the benefits of both compilation and interpretation. The source code is first compiled to an intermediate form, often called bytecode. This bytecode is then interpreted or further compiled to machine code at runtime. This approach allows for platform independence while still providing some of the performance benefits of compilation.
Very interesting. Now, let's consider some edge cases. How do just-in-time, JIT compilers fit into this picture?
Excellent question, Sheila. JIT compilers add another layer of complexity to our discussion. They operate at runtime, compiling frequently used parts of the code on the fly for better performance. This approach allows for optimizations based on runtime information that isn't available during traditional ahead-of-time compilation. Languages like JavaScript in modern browsers often use JIT compilation.
That's fascinating, Victor. It seems like the distinction between compilers and interpreters isn't always clear-cut. Are there any other challenges or considerations when discussing this topic in an interview setting?
You're absolutely right, Sheila. One important point to consider is that the terms compiled language and interpreted language can be misleading. Many languages can be both compiled and interpreted, depending on the implementation. It's also worth mentioning that some modern systems use a combination of interpretation, JIT compilation, and ahead-of-time compilation to balance performance and flexibility.
Thank you, Victor, for that comprehensive explanation. As we wrap up, do you have any tips for our listeners on how to approach this question in an interview?
Certainly, I'd recommend starting with a clear, high-level distinction between compilers and interpreters. Then gradually dive into the details, discussing advantages, disadvantages, and real-world examples. Don't forget to mention hybrid approaches and modern techniques like JIT compilation. Finally, emphasize that the choice between compilation and interpretation often depends on the specific requirements of a project, such as performance needs, development speed, and target platforms.
Excellent advice, Victor. To our listeners, remember that interviewers are often looking for a nuanced understanding of these concepts. Don't be afraid to discuss the grey areas and modern developments in the field, And always be prepared to relate your knowledge to practical scenarios. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Compilers Interview Crashcasts. A big thank you to Victor for sharing his expertise. Remember to check out our other episodes for more interview preparation tips. Until next time, this is Sheila, wishing you the best of luck in your interviews.